Omisade, so good to see you. We have crossed paths for a long time, and this is long, long, long overdue.
I feel like that too. So thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to have a conversation and talk about all things menopause and aging.
Yes, yes. And we'll just reference the shirts. We jumped out. We did not plan this. It
We
just, it
didn't.
just, we
It
just
looks
felt
good
it.
though. It looks
We
really
just
good.
felt it. It looks good. It's coordinated. It's coordinated.
Mhm.
Well, let's jump right in and talk because I have read a lot of your work, listened to a lot of the things you've done. You are all about advocacy, and this is a time where we need it most. So, for people that don't know you, first talk a little bit about your website and your voice.
Sure. I think the way I would like to introduce myself to your listeners is my name is Omi Sade. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I actually live on the occupied land of the Occaneechi-Sapona Nation, which is also known as Durham, North Carolina. And I am a advocacy consultant in social justice work. But the podcast and the website that people are probably most familiar with is the Black Girl's Guide to Surviving Menopause, which is a multimedia project that I started in 2019 in an effort to start to normalize conversations around menopause and aging by centering the voices of Black women, women identified people, and gender expansive people. So our work is absolutely grounded in culture and narrative shift work. And the framing of that for me comes through my work as someone who's done social justice work for the past, now we're 26 years, 26
Oh,
years of
wow.
social justice work. Sure. Mm-hmm.
Well, talk about that because you have a lot of stories and there is a narrative that needs to be switched. And I've noticed that recently, obviously, a lot of people are talking about midlife, a lot of people are talking about menopause, but you've been talking about it long before that was something that was in the zeitgeist and people were talking about.
Mm. I mean, it really was born out of my own experience. I'll be 55 in April, and back in 2018, I went through a really tumultuous year. We lost our first sibling in our family. My parents had already passed away. My parents have been ancestors for a while now, so I kind of was used to moving in the world without my parents.
Hmm.
But to have a sibling pass away was just really gut wrenching, and we
I
didn't
can't imagine.
anticipate it. And then we had a really crazy natural disaster happen here in North Carolina. There was a hurricane called Florence, and it came
Hmm.
in and the eye of the storm sat over my hometown in eastern North Carolina, which then unhoused my eldest sister, who's 20 years older than me. So I rushed home to start doing work around recovery efforts and relief efforts. And when I returned back from home, I was released from my job, which is a very
Oh
nice
my
way to say I
gosh.
was fired,
Right.
which is fine, which is so fine. As a person who believes in the universe and in destiny, I know that that was critical for me in this kind of like uptick of all these events of giving me an opportunity to be like, you know what, Omi, what do you want to do? So I took
Hmm.
a break from doing social justice work in 2019. I decided I was going to do a sabbatical with the support of folk who are inside of my movement family, people who are in my immediate family, in particular, my eldest son, Che, who will be 30 in March. He was one of my big cheerleaders. He was like, Mom, take a break. And I was like, you know what? I'm going
Good
to
for
take a
you.
break. And I'm so glad that I did because what was birthed during that break was me wanting to have conversations with other Black women around how's your life now that you're older? Like, what are you navigating? Like, what does love look like? What does grief, rage, career change, pleasure, sex, relationships with your kids, with your friends, and certainly kind of tucked in that was menopause. And so my son asked me, he's like, "Are you going to capture these stories?" And I said, "Yeah, I think I do want to do that." And he was like, "Well, how?" And so I was like, "Well, maybe I'll do a podcast." I love podcasts. I love audio storytelling. I like to be able to create my own landscape inside my head around what people are sharing with me. So I'm a little bit of a This American Life snap judgment junkie. I'm just like, in the car on the way home from the grocery store and can't get out the car because there's a story. And I've created my own imagery of the person and where they live and everything like that. So I said, I'll do a podcast. And so the person who was my producer then and is my producer now, she said, "You know what this is?" I said, "What? What is it?" And she said, "It's the Black Girl's Guide to Surviving Menopause." I said, "That's funny." And that's true. It's actually
Hmm.
true because there's so much confusion, taboo, concern, fear, anger, strong feelings of grief and rage around navigating these transitions. The transition of getting older, the transition of what happens to your body. And we all have very different experiences. And so I wanted to ground this experience through first what's familiar to me. So I'm a
Sure.
Black girl inside of a 55-year-old body.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to talk to other Black girls. And for me, that felt important to be clear that not only am I talking about cis hetero Black women, I'm also talking about trans women, I'm talking about gender expansive people, like really broadening the conversation to be like, hey, you want to talk about menopause? You want to talk about getting older? And emphatically, the answer has been yes, Omi, I definitely want to talk about that. I also recognize, Tamsen, that not everybody's into podcasts. I try not to judge those people. But I know that not everybody is a podcast person. So we also started to do these intentional intergenerational conversations in person. And I'm so grateful that we were able to do those in 2019 before everything happened with the pandemic, because it gave me a sense of this is an intergenerational conversation. There are folk in the generation ahead of me and behind me who want to have the conversation, are curious about the conversation, just really want to talk to each other about our bodies and our emotions and our spirit, and like how we're living lives that are vibrant and that we're well taken care of by the people who support us and love us. And so we've done that. And then the last thing is I decided right after George Floyd was murdered that I wanted to offer something in writing to my community as we were all kind of navigating this collective grief and lament. And so we published a zine, and our first zine is called Messages from the Menopausal Multiverse. And so, because there's so much wisdom in the multiverse, right? That this menopausal multiverse is wise, rich, potent place. And so we offered that to the community. And then we just did our second edition of the zine, and it's called The Motherboard, which is giving an opportunity or an ode to mothering, and how mothering is not something that is transformed by death. Like mothering can happen through an ancestral relationship as well. So that's what I've been up to.
But just a few things. Just a few things. When I want to go back to the intergenerational, because I found that was really interesting to me, because I think that the reason that we're having this conversation at our age is because no one was having it at the age that some of the people are that we're trying to talk to right now. So I feel like, aside from the fact that we need to talk about it and we need to share with each other in this Gen X baby boomer, where we are right now, we have a duty to talk to the girls that are coming up so they don't feel the confusion that we feel. And, there's no question about it that the women's healthcare system is broken, or it is not fixed, or it is not ready for where we are right now. And so I feel like we're leading that movement, which is exciting to me. And it's not as taboo anymore, though it still is. And, people are not always talking about it like you and I are. They whisper the word menopause. They don't want to acknowledge they're in it. So I find the intergenerational part really fascinating and very, very necessary.
Right. So what I like to do is I always want to partner with someone who's younger than me. I want to, for us to be thought partners, to co-moderate, co-facilitate spaces together. So we did 5 intergenerational conversations in 2019. In each of those conversations, I deliberately and intentionally partnered with a younger person. I was like, help me design this. Help me bring people to the table. Help me figure out what's the questions that we want everybody to answer. So it would not be a situation where you had somebody who's Generation X or a boomer kind of like distilling wisdom to this younger person, as if this younger person wasn't operating with their own wisdom from their generational footprint. So it was like, so let's have this cross-generational conversation. How do you feel about your body? How are you accessing pleasure that doesn't necessarily have to do with sex, but could? How are you managing grief? How do you advocate for yourself? Like, how do you stand up for yourself? And so we did those. And then when the pandemic kind of brought us all back into our houses, we still did it. We did 2 events virtually in 2020. I co-moderated it with the same person, this wonderful person named Cherazar Crippen. The one I did, the first one we did in DC in 2019 was with Aja Taylor, who's an amazing organizer in Washington, DC. And then last year we did one with Amber J. Phillips. And we did that one just on storytelling, Black storytelling. It was like, everybody come to the table, bring your favorite blanket, your favorite pillow, your favorite snack, and we're just going to talk about stories. And we had 4 storytellers, Amber, myself, Sonia Renee Taylor, and Janata Petrus Nassau, and everybody told a story. And then folk who tuned in, we talked about why storytelling is such a powerful tool to shift the narrative of what we believe in the world, how we see each other, how we understand each other, why stories can divide us, and also why they can bring us together and facilitate healing. And so it was a great event, and we're going to do another one this year. We're not sure who we'll be partnering with, but I trust that the universe will bring me an amazing millennial to make that happen.
Oh, I have no doubt about it, and I couldn't agree with you more. Just as a journalist, in for decades now. That sounds weird, but a journalist for decades now, I understand the power of storytelling, and I understand the power of it in all ways, actually, which is the interesting part. And I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for the fact that we can sit and talk now because of our stories, and because the stories that we're not afraid, to talk about and to share. Because for a long time, that was something that people didn't want to do. What do you think needs to happen? We talk a lot about, Black women and maternal health care, and the fact that they need to be doing more to advocate for that. But when it comes to menopause as well, that is a whole nother part of it that really needs to be advocated for. And that's where your voice is right now.
I think that for folk who are familiar with reproductive justice or reproductive rights, they need to allow themselves the opportunity to see that menopause sits inside of that framework and that work, right? Mm-hmm. So when we talk about reproductive justice, we immediately think about, abortion access and people being able to access care. We think about contraceptives. We think about sex education. We even think about sex positivity. What we don't think about is menopause and aging. And that's almost as if you reach a certain point in the reproductive justice work or the advocacy or the policy work, and then you fall off a cliff. And you're like, what happens? So do we not?
I'm still here.
I'm still here. I still need to engage in work that protects my bodily autonomy. Mm-hmm. I still need to be supported and given the tools I need to actually have agency when I'm interacting with a healthcare provider or with the medical industrial complex, and how they perceive me inside of my Black body as somebody who they might not believe in terms of my pain or whatever physical symptoms I might be having. And so it runs the gamut. So I think of reproductive justice as the through line, and that menopause sits inside of that spectrum. And so I also had an opportunity last year to do some work around some policy, and In Our Own Voice is a national Black reproductive justice organization, and they call to the table people who are doing reproductive justice led by Black women or Black-led organizations to come to the table to create a policy brief for the new administration. And we put together this really robust policy agenda that runs from basically before you start your period until you're an elder. And what's the research that needs to be done around what's happening to Black women, women identified and gender expansive people? What is the advocacy work that needs to be done? What's the policy that protects us? Because it's economics, it's housing, it's the workplace, it's career, it's all of these things. And certainly what has happened because of our generation, because of Generation X, we're amplifying that. And folk are like, I didn't even think that this was a part of RJ. This would have never occurred to me that this was a reproductive justice issue. And I think that it is.
Yeah, there's no question about that. What was your menopause experience? When did you start early, or were you right in the whatever the regular time frame is? I don't even know what it is anymore.
Is it regular? I'm never regular, so I definitely
didn't. I wasn't either. I don't even know what it is anymore. I thought it was 51, and then I went 5 years earlier.
So similar. I actually realized that I was perimenopausal because my ex-husband and I found out that I was pregnant when I was 40. And I was like, Now, I had already been a parent. I was a single parent for a while. I had my first son when I was 25. And so when he's 15, I pop up pregnant. I'm like, And when I go to my OBGYN, she says, well, this is not uncommon for perimenopausal women. And I was like, what is that? What is
I never even heard the word until a few years ago.
Never. I had heard menopause. And everything I associated with menopause was just awful. It's the hot flashes, the crankiness, it's the night sweats. And so I was like, am I menopausal? And they were like, you're not menopausal, but you are perimenopausal. And I was like, I don't even understand what that means. And so it was really a beneficial conversation for me to understand the spectrum of what happens with your hormones. So I had a miscarriage at 40, and then I had my last son at 41. And then
Right.
I actually stopped having a menstrual cycle in 2013. So I'm postmenopausal. Technically, I'm done. I've been done. I've been done. And when I say to people, menopause is actually that 366th day without your
Mm-hmm.
cycle consecutively. And they go, oh, it has to be consecutive. I said, it has to be consecutive. And so it's all of the mythology and also lack of understanding in terms of the physiology around what menopause was. And because I do advocacy work, I'm always that curious person. My doctors expect me to ask questions. They expect me to follow up with them. They expect me to come with my own research. So like, listen, I looked up this thing. Is this a real thing, or is this something I should just ignore because I looked it up online? They were like, that's a real thing. That's not real. And so the sorting hat of helping me figure out what's backed by science, what's backed by medicine, and also them seeing me as a full person and recognizing that the way I experience the world as a Black woman inside of this medical industrial complex would be very different than some of my peers. So I'm grateful that I had that relationship, but that's not been the experience of so many people that I talk to inside my own personal friendship group, but also people who are now like a part of this growing community of folk who are having this conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, it's certainly not. And I did a webinar the other day, and people, the questions that were coming over, it was unbelievable, and they were questions that we've probably both had, but just multiplied, and the confusion that's out there and the frustration, and those are the ones that were on the webinar were able to ask the questions, right? Those are the ones that even knew the questions to ask, and so I think that that's the reason to amplify this conversation and to keep having it. And I'm grateful for what you're doing, because I just think it's so important, and people can laugh about hot flashes and all the silly things that come with it, but truthfully, it's a time of transition, and it's a time that you either fall back or you go forward in a bold way, and you're certainly doing that. So I thank you
Yeah.
for it.
I'm grateful to be able to be a part of what feels like a really rich moment in movement
Mm-hmm.
space. And I also think that it's important if we're building this big tent that we don't engage in erasure or further marginalizing or
Right.
invisibilizing people who are experiencing menopause but don't fit into kind of a white cis hetero woman frame, right? So what
Right.
does that look like? Looks like me, looks like you. It looks like folk who experience menopause early because
Mm-hmm.
of experiences of cancer, or they had a hysterectomy, or they went on hormone replacement therapy for testosterone because
I know.
they're fully living into their gender identity and they're on T. And there's like all these different scenarios that
Mm-hmm.
can be absolutely erased as we talk about menopause. We always say,
Yep.
"Hey, ladies, how's your
Yep.
menopause journey
Yep.
going?" And I'm like, I always say, folk and people is like the most accessible, gender neutral way for me to acknowledge who I am. So I'm not
You're
invisibilized,
so
but I
right.
don't want to invisibilize someone else in the process. Yeah.
You're so right. You're so right, because and I don't, but I don't think it's until we started opening up this conversation
Mhm.
and let people have a voice that we realize just how many people are going through this. And this is,
Yes.
you're right. It's not about women. It's about transition. It's about it going into this different stage, and whatever that looks like. And all these circles intersect and they overlap, and and then that's where these conversations come out of. So I'm
Yes.
grateful we can keep having them. And
Me too.
thank you
Me
for what
too.
you're doing. And where can
Oh,
people find you if they're looking for you?
we like to say that we created a base camp on the dark side of the moon, but if you are not into moon travel, and we do glamping, we're not doing any kind of horror film like aliens. Like
Amen.
our,
Oh,
our
please.
menopause base
With your shirt, I already knew it was glamping.
You
You didn't
already
even have
know,
to tell me
Tamsen,
that.
our menopausal base camp is fully stocked.